All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to How to Gain Admission to Stanford and Ivy League Universities. I'm Dan Lee, and I'm one of the co-founders and also a senior admissions consultant at Solomon Admissions Consulting. So at Solomon Admissions Consulting, we have the largest team in the industry composed of over 100 former admissions officers. We use a team-based approach, and we pool all of our knowledge to help you gain admission to the best possible college or university for you. So these people include people such as the former Assistant Director of Admissions at MIT, the former Director of Admissions at Cornell University, the former Senior Assistant Dean of Admissions at Princeton University, the former Senior Associate Director of Admissions at the University of Pennsylvania, and many, many more people, including the former Assistant Director of Admissions at Stanford University, the former Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Johns Hopkins University, and pretty much every admissions officer from almost every top 20 school. So we use a team-based approach, and we help you gain admission to the best college for you. So the first question to ask is why care? Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford reject over 60% of applicants who have both a perfect 4.0 unweighted GPA and a perfect 1600 on the SAT. And Stanford rejects 70% of students who have perfect SAT scores. So the numbers are necessary, but nowhere near sufficient to gain admission to a top university. So this chart shows three different columns. The first column shows the national average acceptance rate at top 20 schools 18 years ago in 2005. The second column shows the national average acceptance rate at these universities last year. And the third column shows the success rate of Solomon Admissions clients at these universities last year. And keep in mind that Solomon Admissions is the only college admissions consulting firm whose success rates have been verified by a top 50 independent accounting firm. So these success rates have been verified. And keep in mind, these success rates at these universities are ones where at least 20 Solomon Admissions clients apply to at each university. So for the purpose of college admissions and college admissions consulting firms, this tends to be a fairly large data set. So 18 years ago in 2005, Columbia University had a 12% acceptance rate. Last year, their acceptance rate was less than 1/3 of that at 3.7%. And last year, 23.1% of Solomon Admissions clients who applied to Columbia were admitted. 18 years ago in 2005, Princeton University had a 10% acceptance rate. Last year, their acceptance rate was less than half of that at 4.4%. And last year, 50% of Solomon Admissions clients who applied to Princeton were admitted. And keep in mind, once again, these success rates have been verified by an independent large accounting firm, and they represent schools where at least 20 Solomon Admissions clients applied at each school. And so, as you can see, we can anywhere from quadruple to quintuple your odds of acceptance at these universities by working with us. So let's take a look at how elite colleges evaluate applicants. So elite colleges look at both your academic and your personal profile components. So roughly 25% is your SAT or your ACT score. Another 25% consists of your grades, your class rank, and keep in mind that even though many of you attend a private high school that doesn't rank, or a highly competitive public school that doesn't rank, colleges will know that colleges will know exactly where you're ranked because your high school counselor will submit a school report to each university, which will outline the highest GPA in the graduating class, the lowest GPA, as well as the median GPA. And from that, colleges can deduce exactly where you're ranked in your class. And course difficulty or course rigor, which simply refers to the number of AP and honors courses that you've taken. The other 50% is improvable at the time that you apply. So 25% consists of your personal statement, your supplemental essays, which have to be tailored to what every top school looks for. We can tell you what every top school looks for because our admissions officers have worked as admissions officers at every top school. So if you're applying to Brown, what does Brown University look for? Brown looks for students who want academic freedom through the open curriculum. If you're applying to the University of Pennsylvania, what does UPenn look for? UPenn looks for students who take an interdisciplinary approach to academics. And the reason they do that is they have 4 different schools at UPenn. They have nursing, Wharton, arts and science, and engineering. And they highly encourage students to take courses outside of their particular school that they're at. And so we can tell you what every school looks for. The last part is your addendum, and the addendum is the additional information section of the common application. And that section should really be used to explain any type of academic anomalies in your transcript or your testing. So whether that be low test scores or a semester where you got a few too many Bs, that should really be explained away in the addendum. And the last 25% that we can help you with consists of your activity sheet and your resume, your interviews, and your recommendation letters. So a question we get a lot is, since most top 20 and top 30 schools have gone test optional in light of the pandemic, I mean, there are a few exceptions like Georgetown, is standardized testing on the SAT and ACT really optional at test optional colleges in light of COVID-19? The answer is not really, if you want to be a really competitive candidate. So you have to keep in mind that at these schools, there are far more applicants who submit near perfect testing than there are slots in the incoming freshman class. And so given two equivalent applicants, one with strong testing and the other without, the applicant with strong testing will look much more attractive. And the reason they're going to look much more attractive is the fact that higher testing is going to improve a school's ranking in the US News and World Report. And keep in mind that your peers who submit strong testing will have a huge leg up on you in the admissions process. And testing is definitely not optional if your GPA falls below the 25th percentile GPA for admitted applicants at a school. So we generally recommend that you shoot for an SAT or ACT score that's at the 75th percentile or above for admitted applicants at a particular school. So how does Stanford evaluate applicants? And keep in mind, this evaluation system comes straight from our many former Stanford admissions officers who now work for us as college admissions consultants at Solomon. So when Stanford receives your application, the first thing they do is they recalculate your GPA. So they focus on grades from 10th and 11th grade only. They don't look at your freshman year grades. So we've gotten students who've gotten several Bs freshman year into Stanford who got all A's in 10th and 11th grade. They only look at academic core courses. So academic core courses refer to history, English, science, math, foreign language, other academic courses like computer science. If you got an A in physical education, typing, band, or orchestra, those grades get thrown out when they recalculate your GPA. And Stanford also uses flat grading. So what that means is if you have an A- on your transcript, that gets upgraded to an A, which is great if you have an A-. Conversely, if you have a B+, that actually gets downgraded to a B when they recalculate your GPA, which is not so great if you have one or more B+ on your transcript. So let's look at the Stanford applicant rating system. And as I've said before, this comes straight from our Stanford admissions officers who work for us as consultants who used to be on the admissions committee at Stanford. So Stanford assigns every applicant 6 separate ratings on a 1 to 5 scale, as well as an overall rating on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the highest, 5 is the lowest. So Stanford gives you an academic grades and GPA rating 1 to 5. They give you a testing rating 1 to 5. They give you an extracurricular rating 1 to 5. And I bolded the next one. They give you an intellectual vitality rating 1 to 5. And the reason I bolded that is that the intellectual vitality rating is the most important rating at Stanford, and it tends to separate the students with perfect grades in testing who get in from the ones who do not. A recommendation letter rating 1 to 5, and a self-presentation essay rating 1 to 5. So Stanford also assigns every applicant an overall rating on a 1 to 5 scale using a plus or minus system. So obviously a 2+ is better than a 2-. 1 being the highest, 5 being the lowest. So someone with an overall rating of 1 is extremely rare. This represents less than 2% of the applicant pool at Stanford, and it means you're a clear admit. And these are oftentimes students with an intellectual vitality rating of 1. So overall rating of 1 means that on the sub ratings that Stanford has, you've scored pretty much a 1 on almost all of them. And that is extremely rare to do. A rating of 2 overall is where you want to fall. It means you're going to be competitive and well within range to be admitted. Roughly 10% of the applicant pool at Stanford has an overall rating of 2. And it means you're compelling and will be given serious consideration by the admissions committee. Having an overall rating of 3 means you fall short of being compelling and are much less likely to be admitted. And this is where most straight A students with perfect testing fall. They're generally going to be students who have an overall rating of 3, possibly even a 4. An overall rating of 4 means you're not compelling and you'll be denied unless there's a hook. An overall rating of 5 means you're not competitive at all and you will automatically be denied. So let's look at the most common profile of a rejected Stanford applicant. So a rejected Stanford applicant generally has an academic grades and GPA rating of 2 to 3. What that means is they've taken most of the AP courses their high school offers. They may have 1, possibly 2 Bs in academic core courses in 10th or 11th grade. They have a testing rating of 1 to 2. So that means they most likely scored in the 99th percentile on the SAT or ACT. They have an extracurricular rating of 3 to 4. And I'll go into what that means later, but in a nutshell, that means that this is a well-rounded student, and Stanford, like most top schools, does not admit well-rounded students. They have an intellectual vitality rating of 3 to 4, which I'll go into what that means later. They have a recommendation letter rating of 3 to 4, a self-presentation / essay rating of 2 to 3 for a overall rating of 3. So let's take a look at the most common profile of an admitted Stanford applicant. And so you can see that there are some similarities and many differences between the admitted Stanford applicant and the rejected Stanford applicant. So the admitted applicant has an academic grades GPA rating of 1 to 2. That means they would have taken every AP and honors course that their high school offers. They would have all A's, no B's whatsoever. The student has an academic rating of 1 to 2, so they actually have the same testing rating as the rejected applicant. Both the rejected applicant and the admitted applicant at Stanford scored in the 99th percentile on the SAT. They have a much higher extracurricular rating than the rejected applicant, so their extracurricular rating would be 1 to 3. And what that means is this student is extremely accomplished at one thing. They're very angular and accomplished. They are not well-rounded at all. They have a much higher intellectual vitality rating of 1 to 3, and I'll go into what that means later. They have a recommendation letter rating of 2 to 3 and a self-presentation essay rating of 1 to 2 for a overall rating of 1 to 2. So let's talk about what an intellectual vitality rating of 1 out of 5 means at Stanford, which is the highest rating. This is somebody who's done academic research outside the classroom with a college professor and who's been published in a peer-reviewed academic journal. This student would have done substantial work on founding and developing a nonprofit 501c3 related to their area of academic passion. They would have written a very strong Stanford intellectual vitality supplemental essay. And this student shows a true love of learning at a high level outside the classroom. So when Stanford is looking at intellectual vitality, they're really asking a couple of questions. Number one, does the applicant take ownership of his, her, or their education outside the classroom? Is the applicant the kind of student who would enrich the learning of other Stanford students? And is the applicant passionate about learning? So each year, Stanford asks you 3 different main supplemental essays. The first one is the intellectual vitality essay, which we're going to discuss. The second essay is a note to your roommate, and the third essay is what matters to you and why. So the prompt for the intellectual vitality essay is the Stanford community is deeply curious and driven to learn in and out of the classroom. Reflect on an idea or experience that makes you genuinely excited about learning, 250 words. So I call this a never-ending dinner conversation essay. This is the essay where you can talk about an intellectual topic for hours on end, and you're so excited about it that you can continually talk about it for a long length of time. So Stanford uses this essay to weed out perfect students who are not intellectuals, who get perfect grades and test scores for the sake of getting into Stanford and getting a high-paying job, not because they love learning. And that's actually most straight A students with perfect testing. They are not intellectuals and they don't actually love learning. And this is testing whether you love learning for the sake of learning or for the sake of getting into Stanford. A bad answer to this question talks about Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which applicants use to study for the AP US History exam. And a great answer to this question addresses one intellectual idea that can be translated to undergraduate research and publication at Stanford and is related to your future academic major and goals. So let's talk about some of the differences between Stanford and the Ivy. So unlike the Ivy, Stanford tends to admit the most compelling applicant on paper, not necessarily the most qualified applicant. So every year, Solomon Admissions gets several students into both Stanford and Harvard simultaneously. And the students get into who get into Harvard are the finished product on paper. They are perfect on paper, and there's not much to brush up. The students we get into Stanford tend not to be the finished product on paper. They tend to be students who have potential, but who do not look necessarily the most accomplished on paper, if that makes sense. They also weigh the SAT less than the Ivies. They weigh the supplemental essays much more heavily than the Ivies. There are years where we're able to get students into Stanford at 8 or 9x the average acceptance rate. It's because they put so much emphasis on the essays. Stanford also weighs athletic recruiting more heavily than the Ivies. So Stanford has roughly twice the percentage of recruited athletes as most Ivy League schools. Stanford also assigns applicants a separate intellectual vitality rating. And Stanford does not give as big a boost to early action applicants. Early action applicants at Stanford tend to be advantaged if they're hooked. So if they're a development case, recruited athlete, legacy, etc. And Stanford also tends to favor public school students over private. So how do Ivy League schools evaluate applicants? So obviously there are 8 different Ivies, and each one has a different rating system, but we're going to use Dartmouth College as an example because Dartmouth's rating system tends to be very similar to the rating systems used at a lot of Ivy League schools. So at Dartmouth, they assign you 2 overall ratings on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, an academic rating 1 to 5, and an extracurricular / personal rating of 1 to 5. They also give you 5 subscores. So they give you a subscore for grades and GPA, 1 to 5, testing rating 1 to 5, and intellectual qualities rating 1 to 5. And the intellectual qualities rating at Dartmouth is almost identical to the intellectual vitality rating at Stanford. They also give you an extracurricular rating 1 to 5 and a personal rating 1 to 5. So let's take a look at what an academic rating of 5 out of 5 at Dartmouth looks like, which is the highest rating. This is someone in the top 1 to 2% of their high school class. They would have taken the most challenging course load of AP courses. They would have scored in the 99th percentile on the SAT or ACT. They would have glowing letters of recommendation indicating that the student is the best from the past several years from his, her, or their high school. They would have shown an intense love of learning, as evidenced by academic research outside the classroom with a college professor, leading to publication in a journal. And they would have the potential to be a leader in their future academic field. So let's take a look at what an academic rating of 3 out of 5 at Dartmouth looks like. This is someone in the top 5 to 10% of their high school class. They would have taken the most challenging course load of AP courses. They would have scored in the 95th percentile or above on the SAT or ACT. They would have strong but unexceptional letters of recommendation. And this student really lacks the intense love of learning of academic 5s. So this is a student who's driven to achieve more by competition than by a love of learning. And in most cases, students who have a rating of 3 out of 5 academically will not be admitted to Dartmouth or to any Ivy League school. So let's talk about what an extracurricular personal rating of 5 out of 5, which is the highest at Dartmouth, looks like. These are all individual examples of 5s. So Dartmouth, like most Ivy League schools, looks for students who are very angular. And so published author, Regeneron STS finalist, which is the top 40 in the country for doing STEM research in high school, Olympic medalist, soloist at Carnegie Hall with the New York Philharmonic, USAMO qualifier, awards at the national level, and someone who has a patent pending, obviously without parental involvement. So let's take a look at what an extracurricular and personal rating of 3 out of 5 looks like. So this is somebody who will most likely not be admitted to Dartmouth. This is someone who's well-rounded. They have awards at the regional level. They have significant commitment at a high level to a few activities. Examples include student body president, all-state orchestra, captain of a varsity sports team, nationally ranked debater. And this student is well-rounded and involved, but not the most passionate about anything. So I call this student the jack of all trades, the master of none. and this student will have a very difficult time gaining admission to Dartmouth or to any Ivy League school. So for those of you who are interested in computer science and engineering, several Ivies have a separate engineering admissions process. There's a separate engineering admissions process at Columbia, Cornell, and UPenn. And there are some considerations that you need to keep in mind if you're applying to these schools that have a separate engineering admissions process. So first and foremost, engineering faculty are on the admissions committee. And so for those of you who are not familiar, engineering faculty care a lot about grades and test scores. So because of that, there's greater emphasis on grades and testing. There's also a greater emphasis on academic research in engineering and on engineering related internships. And keep in mind that if you're a female applicant to engineering, every Ivy League school wants a 50-50 male-female ratio in the engineering department. And so if you're a female applicant to engineering at an Ivy that has a separate engineering admissions process, you will be twice as likely to be admitted as an equally qualified male applicant of the same ethnicity. So a question we get a lot is, should I apply early decision or early action by the November 1st deadline? The answer is unequivocally yes, and we'll go into the reasons why. So most Ivy League and other top universities fill approximately 50% or half the available seats in their incoming freshman class through binding early decision or non-binding early action, and the deadline is November 1st. The advantage conferred by applying ED or EA is the academic equivalent of adding 150 points to your SAT score. Early decision and early action applicants at schools not named Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and Princeton compete against a much weaker applicant pool. So the strongest students in the country apply early to Harvard. And so even though Harvard has a REA acceptance rate most years between 15 and 20%, and their RD acceptance rate tends to be between 2 to 3%, that does not mean that it's easier to get into Harvard early, because the early pool at Harvard is much, much stronger than the regular pool at Harvard. Conversely, as you go down the line to a school like Duke, the early decision pool at Duke is much weaker than the regular decision pool at Duke. And the reason for that is if you're applying binding early decision to Duke, you're not competing against the students who are applying REA to Harvard, REA to Stanford, REA to Yale, REA to Princeton, ED to Columbia, ED to UPenn, etc. And so you're not competing against the strongest students in the country. And so the ED pool at a school like Duke is going to be much weaker than the regular decision pool at Duke. Your application is read much more closely since there's more time to devote to each application. And borderline applicants who are waitlisted regular decision at a particular university would have gotten into that university had they applied early decision or early action to that school in many cases. So this chart shows three different columns. The first column shows the early decision / early action acceptance rate at Ivy League schools. Second column shows the regular decision acceptance rate, and the third column shows the percent of the incoming freshman class filled through binding ED or non-binding EA applicants. So the ED acceptance rate at Brown University was 17.5%. The RD acceptance rate at Brown was less than 1/3 of that at 5.4%. And Brown filled 38% of their incoming freshman class through binding early decision. The restricted early action acceptance rate at Yale was 13.8%. The RD acceptance rate was less than half of that at 5.1%. And it's unclear what percent of the incoming freshman class Yale filled through early action. And the reason for that is early action is non-binding. So as you can see, it's a huge advantage to apply early to an Ivy League school. So let's talk about strategic positioning and crafting one's narrative. So what is strategic positioning? Strategic positioning is a way to make you stand out. You're positioning your strengths against an institution's weaknesses for the purpose of getting you into college. So for those of you who watch tennis a lot, obviously Federer retired. Nadal is going to be retiring after the 2024 season, but they had a lot of classic matches, Federer versus Nadal. And when they played, Nadal would structure points so that he pitted his strength against Federer's weakness. So he would structure points so that the tennis ball went from his lefty forehand to Federer's weaker one-handed backhand, and he would pit his strength against Federer's weakness to win the point. And so in the college admission sense, you want to do the same thing. You want to pit strength against weakness. So the example of that is if you're a student who's an engineering whiz with a lot of science awards, it's much more advantageous for you to apply to Yale, because Yale does not really get that many strong engineering majors, versus applying to MIT, where you'd be a dime a dozen and would not really stand out. So let's talk about strategic positioning and building a class. So admissions committees are building a class. Top colleges are looking to build a well-rounded incoming class composed of students who are not well-rounded. Let me say that again. So top colleges are looking to build a well-rounded incoming class composed of students who are not well-rounded. So the key question is, who are you going to be in the incoming class? What talent or perspective do you bring to the incoming class that no one else brings? And do you have the potential to be a future leader in your chosen academic field? So let's take a look at a very simplistic example of strategic positioning. So most applicants, most clients who come and work with Solomon, when they come to us, they are well-rounded. And that's problematic because the top schools don't like admitting well-rounded students. And so the strategy is to focus your personal statement on a singular passion or intellectual pursuit that makes the applicant seem much more focused than they actually are. So think of your high school career as 200 hours of footage that you're shooting for a 2-hour movie, and depending on how you splice those 200 hours down to 2 hours, you can either make yourself look well-rounded or you can make yourself look angular, and you want to do the latter. So let's look at common case studies of clients we work with at Solomon. So these are all real clients that we work with at Solomon. We'll go into kind of what their profile was when they came to us, what changes we made, and what the outcome was. So case study number one is the undeclared major applicant. We work with a lot of students who have no idea what they want to study in college, and that's perfectly fine, but you can't say that in the application, because almost every school asks you, what do you want to study and why? And I don't know what I want to study is not a compelling answer. So this student came to us junior year. He was a white male applicant from a public high school. He had a 3.7 weighted GPA, taking a very light course load. He had only taken one AP course his first 3 years of high school. He also had a lot of pretty much all B's his sophomore year, which didn't look great. He had a 33 on the ACT, which is a very average score. He was an avid thespian. He had no major extracurricular activities outside of theater, and he was completely undecided on his major. So the strategy we use is we help the student find his interest in linguistics through theater. So linguistics is a undersubscribed major at every top school. If you have a strong background in linguistics, they're much more likely to admit you. So what we did is we helped the student to find a research position with a linguistics professor over the summer. He ended up doing research on linguistics and ended up getting published in a peer-reviewed academic journal as a third author on a paper, which is extraordinary. And we also suggested that the student found a nonprofit to show leadership initiative. He did that. We also had the student submit a theater supplement for the application, and the theater supplement is considered extra credit in the application. And the outcome is that he was admitted at the University of Chicago, Georgetown, and at NYU. And keep in mind, students with this profile generally do not get into Chicago and Georgetown. Let's look at case study number two. This is the recruited athlete. So this student came to us senior year. We work with a lot of students who come to us senior year. It's not too late to work with us. And so when she came to us, she was a white female applicant from a private high school. She had a 3.6 weighted GPA. She had a lot of B's on her transcript. She had okay but not great testing. She was a talented track runner, and she was recruited by several Division I schools. She was well-rounded extracurricularly, and she was undecided on her major. So when she came to us after she had been denied at Wake Forest applying early. And so she panicked and she wanted help with her application to get in. So the strategy we use is she initially wanted to write her application about sports and about being undecided on her major. So we vetoed both of those things, and instead we had her write her entire application about her leadership pursuits, as well as her interest in mathematics and physics, to showcase what she would bring to the campus outside of sports. So if you're someone who's really good at sports and who's a recruited athlete, colleges already know that you're good at sports. So they don't want you to write what they call the cliche athlete's essay, where you talk about the winning shot in sports and what that taught you about life. They want to know what you bring to campus outside of sports. And we positioned her as a physics major, since women are underrepresented in physics, and she had all A's in her math and her physics courses. And the outcome is that she was accepted early at the College of William and Mary, which was her top choice, and she ended up running on the track team there. So let's look at case study number 3. This is the student with no extracurricular activities. This student came to us senior year. And so because she came to us senior year, we couldn't even change her activities because it was too late and she had to apply. She was a white female applicant from a public high school. She had a 3.9 GPA, taking a very light course load. She had a 30 on the ACT, and a 30 is going to be below the 25th percentile at every top 30 school. And she spent her summers vacationing in Europe and visiting museums and shows in Paris and London. And she had no extracurricular activities, and she was completely undecided on her major. So the strategy we use is we used her interest in art through visiting famous art galleries around the world, and we positioned her as an art history major. Art history is an undersubscribed major, and students with a background in art history are more likely to be admitted. So the application talked about the different pieces of art that she had seen around the world and how that would translate to her major in art history. The outcome is that she was admitted at both USC and NYU. And keep in mind that USC routinely rejects students with higher grades, much higher testing, and who have a lot of extracurricular activities. So let's look at major specific case studies. We're going to be covering majors that a lot of you are interested in, and we'll go into the pros and cons of applying to colleges for those of you who are interested in these majors. Case study number 1 is the Premed Applicant. We work with a lot of students who want to go to medical school. We almost never market them as future doctors because there are many pitfalls of this applicant. Number 1, there are too many applicants who are pre-med, and colleges want a diversity of academic interests in their incoming freshman class. They don't want an entire incoming freshman class filled with future doctors. And so the student tends to have a generic extracurricular profile. They would have done medical research at a university. They would have volunteered in the emergency room at a hospital. And they would really have your standard medical volunteering and clinical experiences. And I always tell students, you're not applying to medical school. You're applying to a 4-year liberal arts college. So no one cares why you want to be a doctor. So don't talk about it. So let's look at a client we work with who was pre-med. So this student came to us junior year. She was an Asian American female applicant from a highly ranked and hyper-competitive public high school. She had a perfect 4.0 GPA, taking the most rigorous AP courses. She scored in the 99th percentile on the SAT. She had done medical research at a university for 1 summer, but no publications or awards. She did science Olympiad. She volunteered at the hospital. She did varsity cross country. She was good at drawing, and we actually had her submit an art supplement. And she had a few smaller leadership positions, and she wanted to major in human biology at Stanford, which is the most oversubscribed pre-med major at Stanford. So the strategy we use is obviously human biology, or hum bio, is the most oversubscribed pre-med major at Stanford, and obviously Asian American females are highly overrepresented in the pre-med arena. So instead, what we did is we had her remove the hospital volunteering experience from her activity sheet, and we positioned her as an art history major because art history is an undersubscribed major, and this student had perfect grades in her history and our art courses. We also had her submit a strong art supplement, and our entire and we also had her write a independent research paper in art history. She submitted the paper for publication and got it published, and she applied to Stanford as a art history major. And the outcome is that she was admitted at Stanford. And Stanford, like most top schools, once you're admitted, you can declare whatever major you want. So she simply declared human biology as her major once she was admitted. So let's look at case study number 2. This is the computer science / engineering applicant. We work with a lot of students who want to study computer science. In many cases, you don't want to talk about computer science in your application. So there are many pitfalls of this applicant. So too many applicants are interested in computer science and engineering, and colleges once again want a diversity of academic interests in their incoming freshman class. So this student tends to have a generic extracurricular profile. So they would have done robotics. If they're female, they would have done girls who code. They would have taken AP computer science. They would have interned at their parents' tech company, and they would have self-taught themselves multiple programming languages and possibly created an app for the smartphone. And keep in mind that this is especially bad positioning for the most overrepresented students in this field. Who are these students? These are East Asian and South Asian male applicants. So if you're East Asian or South Asian and you're a male applicant, you want to be very wary of applying directly to computer science programs. So let's take a look at a student we work with who wanted to study computer science. He came to us junior year. He was an Indian male from a top boarding school. He had all A's, taking the most rigorous AP courses with only 2 B's. He had a 35 on the ACT. He did robotics club. He had a 5 on the AP computer science exam. He self-taught himself multiple programming languages. He did tennis, chess club, speech and debate. We had him do an independent research project in linguistics, and he had no research or major awards for computer science, and he wanted to major in computer science at Harvard. So the strategy we use is, obviously, Indian males are the most overrepresented applicants in computer science, and because of that, they face the highest bar for entry into a top CS program. So what we did is we repositioned this student as a computational linguistics major. So there's an area of linguistics called computational linguistics, where you can apply your computer science background to the study of language. So we set the student up with a research opportunity with a computational linguistics professor, and he applied to all these universities as a linguistics major, and his entire application talked about his interest in linguistics and philosophy. The outcome is that he was admitted at Harvard and Cornell, and once you're admitted, you can declare whatever major you want. So he simply declared computer science as his major. Let's look at case study number 3. This is the business/economics applicant. So we send a lot of students to Wall Street as analysts at large bulge bracket banks, whether they be Goldman Sachs, Citi, JP Morgan, etc. And there are many pitfalls of this applicant. So most top colleges do not have an undergraduate business major. So I don't know if you're aware of that. Harvard, no undergrad business major. Yale, no undergrad business major. Stanford, no undergrad business major. Princeton, no undergrad business major. Columbia, no undergrad business major. Duke, no undergrad business major. The list goes on and on. So you can't even talk about your interests at most top universities because you can't study business there. And the last thing that admissions officers want to read about is what I call the Wolf of Wall Street application. This is an application from a 17-year-old student who wants to study economics or business, go into investment banking on Wall Street, and make a lot of money. That's just simply not an appealing application to admissions officers. And so I always tell students, you're not applying for a MBA program, you're applying for a 4-year liberal arts education. Do not talk about your interests in investment banking or private equity or venture capital. So let's take a look at a student we work with who wanted to do the Jerome Fisher M&T program at UPenn. This student came to us junior year. He was an Indian male from a private high school. He had all A's, taking the most rigorous AP courses. He scored in the 99th percentile on the SAT. He was a nationally ranked policy debater. He was an Eagle Scout. He had no business experience, and he wanted to enter the dual Jerome Fisher M&T or Management and Technology program at UPenn. So for those of you who are not familiar with M&T, M&T is the most selective dual program at Penn that allows you to graduate with both a degree from Wharton as well as a degree from Penn Engineering. You take about double the number of credits that a normal UPenn student takes, and it gives you access to the most exclusive alumni network once you graduate. And it's very common for M&T grads to skip investment banking and go straight into private equity, which most students find much more desirable than IB. And so the strategy we use is M&T looks for 3 things. Number 1, they look for students who have a strong quantitative background. Obviously, when he came to us, he had a strong quantitative background. Number 2, they look for students who take an interdisciplinary approach to academics. When this student came to us, he had nothing that indicated an interdisciplinary approach to academics. And the third thing they look for is they look for students who have an entrepreneurial spirit. And so when he came to us, he had not done anything that was entrepreneurial. So to address these things, we set him up with a research opportunity with an industrial engineering and operations research professor to strengthen his quantitative background and interdisciplinary approach. For those of you who are not familiar with industrial engineering is a very interdisciplinary area of engineering that combines engineering with business and statistics and math and the humanities as well. So it's incredibly interdisciplinary. So instead of talking about his interest in private equity and investment banking, he spent his entire application talking about wanting to combine his public policy experience through debate with his quantitative background to start a public policy think tank in Washington, D.C., and that would show that he's entrepreneurial. And the outcome is that he was admitted at M&T, and he is currently applying for private equity and investment banking jobs. So case study number 4 is the combined BSMD applicant. We work with a lot of students who want to go gain admission to combined BSMD programs. For those of you who are not familiar, combined BSMD programs are 6, 7, and 8-year programs where you get into medical school straight out of high school. So there are many pitfalls of this applicant. Number one, there are too many applicants who are pre-med, and colleges want a diversity of academic interests in their incoming freshman class. They don't want an entire freshman class filled with future doctors. For BSMD programs, you have to be admitted to both the undergraduate college and to the medical school. So we get a lot of students into the PLEME program at Brown, which is the program in liberal medical education. It's the hardest BSMD program to get into in the country, and most years it has an acceptance rate around 2%. So to get into PLEME, you have to be admitted to both Brown undergrad and to the Albert School of Medicine at Brown. So what does Brown undergrad look for in pre-meds? Brown undergrad looks for pre-meds who want to utilize the open curriculum and who want academic freedom in their pre-medical studies. So whether that means combining your pre-medical studies with sociology or pre-medical studies with anthropology, they want someone who's going to utilize the open curriculum. What does the Albert School of Medicine at Brown University look for? The Albert School of Medicine looks for students who have a compelling mission in medicine and who have the requisite research, clinical, and volunteer experiences to back up their compelling mission in medicine. So you have to market yourself differently for non-BSMD programs. So if you're applying to Harvard or Stanford, do not talk about wanting to be a doctor, versus applying to combined BSMD programs where it's all about why you want to be a doctor. And so you have to distinguish yourself from all the other students who talk about why they want to be a doctor. So let's look at a PLEME applicant that we work with. So this student came to us senior year. She was an Asian American female from a public high school. She had a perfect 4.0 GPA, taking the most rigorous AP courses. She had a 34 on the ACT. Her AP scores actually were not great. She scored a lot of 3s and 4s on her AP exams. She had national awards for research on environmental issues. She founded clubs promoting interest in STEM and conservation. She was a hospital volunteer. And she wanted to apply to Stanford, the top Ivies, and to PLEME. And so we used a bifurcated 2-pronged approach for her. So for the top Ivies, what we did is we removed the hospital volunteering experience from her activity sheet, and we marketed her as an environmental engineering major. Since everything else being equal, female applicants are twice as likely to be admitted to engineering as an equally qualified male applicant of the same ethnicity. And so her entire application talked about the conservation, the environmental science research she'd done, her interest in conservation, etc. For the PLEME program at Brown, it's all about why you want to be a doctor, but we had to distinguish her from other students who want to be doctors. And so we marketed her as somebody who wanted to practice rural medicine. And the reason for that is there's an extremely high demand at every medical school for general physicians who want to practice in rural areas. So these are physicians who want to practice in North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, etc. And the reason for that is these places have a shortage of doctors, and these places need doctors. And so she had shadowed a physician in a rural area, and her entire application talked about her interest in rural medicine. And the outcome is that she was admitted at PLEME at Brown. She was also admitted at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. And if you're curious where she went, she ended up choosing Stanford. So I've been talking a lot about research in this presentation. And the reason for that is research is a large component of getting you into an elite college. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Solomon Research Scholars Program. It's a program that allows you, it's a 10-week online high school program that allows you to do research remotely. You're going to write a 15 to 20-page research paper at the end of the 10-week period, covering a specific topic within a field of interest. Our research mentors are all current PhD candidates or PhD students at top universities, and their backgrounds are in over 40 different academic disciplines. You're going to meet with the research mentor 1 hour a week over the course of 10 weeks. It's a one-on-one meeting, and it's open to students in 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, and no prior research experience is required. So the vast majority of the students who enroll in this program have never done research before, and you will be paired with a PhD research mentor based on your interest in a particular academic field. And so this program is particularly useful because it has many benefits. Number one, it's going to increase your intellectual vitality rating at the top colleges. As we've already discussed, this rating has nothing to do with grades and test scores. In fact, most students who have perfect grades in testing actually have very low intellectual vitality. And As we've also discussed, the top colleges tend to reject the vast majority of students who have perfect grades in testing, but who have low intellectual vitality. So this will be the first exposure to research for many students. A lot of our clients end up doing undergraduate research once they're in college, and this will be a great way to expose them to that. And this will also allow you to explore a field of study that you're interested in. So at Solomon Admissions Consulting, we provide one-on-one college admissions counseling from the largest team in the industry of over 100 former admissions officers. We help you on everything from A to Z. We work with students as early as middle school and as late as their senior year of high school. Here's a copy of some of our acceptance letters. Obviously, we've redacted the students' names to preserve confidentiality. You can see more sample acceptance letters on our website as well. So with that said, thanks for coming to our presentation. I highly encourage all of you to set up a free 20-minute consultation. You can do that by calling us at 646-828-1994 or by emailing us at info@solomonadmissions.com. During the 20-minute free consultation, we will give you feedback on your profile, tell you what the strengths of your profile are. Well, more importantly, we'll tell you what the weaknesses are. We're also going to tell you what schools you're competitive at, but more importantly, we're going to tell you what schools you're not competitive at, because that's very important to know. And we'll tell you exactly what we'll do over the next couple of years to help you improve your profile to gain admission to the best college for you. So even if you decide not to work with us, I highly recommend that you set up a free 20-minute consultation, because it's a great opportunity for you to get free information on your profile that you can use